first time up tonight, so I'll allow them to That's Baraka did that. So what we're going to do is we're going to allow everyone to introduce themselves and what organization you are a part of.
Hello, my name is Dennis Black, political science major at Wayne State University. A number of roles at Wayne State, including Student African American Brotherhood. I was president of that for my sophomore year. Junior year, in charge of the ACLU on campus. Senior year, which would include the past 2 years, organized in a number of different areas on campus. Although most of my organizing experience, the limited amount that I do have, primarily is citywide, but in the last year, primarily working with BSU, SJP, and Students for a Just Palestine, and the National Lawyers Guild at the law school.
Hi everybody, my name is George Rivers. I'm a senior civil engineering student at Howard University. So most of my experience has been out in D.C. I worked with the Alternative Spring Break program in Chicago and in Detroit, focusing on gun violence and literacy. I also worked with founded an organization called Howard University Bicycling Society, where we just worked on sustainable transportation, getting bike racks on campus, having a bike shop on campus. In addition, I guess right now, I've been back home for a year doing AmeriCorps, doing financial education, financial coaching, and financial workshops. That's pretty much it.
Awesome.
Good evening. My name is Wiley Kellerman. I'm a Methodist pastor serving an Episcopal congregation, St. Peter's Episcopal in southwest Detroit. I'm a member of Detroiters Resisting Emergency Management and also actively involved in the Detroit water struggle.
You all know me, but I'll lift up one organization that I'm working with, Students Against Mass Incarceration, one that seeks to abolish the prison-industrial complex of mass incarceration and understanding the intersection of race and all of that. Shekinah glory. Shekinah glory.
Yeah.
I'm Elena Herrada. We met a few minutes ago. I am a member of Detroit Public School Board and a long-time activist in various struggles. I think mostly probably with immigration and anti-racism.
All right, so can everybody give our panel a hand? Make sure everybody's listening. All right, good job. So since we have such a vast panel up here, and we have a multi-generational panel, the first question is because of that. So the question is, what was the climate like in Detroit at the time as you were organizing? Okay, let me see, who do I go to first? Elena.
I want to raise up a time and place in Detroit history that we never talk about and is very little written about. So I'm going to talk to you about 1974. The reason it's important is because at that time there was busing going on in Detroit. There was a desegregation movement going on in Detroit schools, in Michigan schools. We thought we were the center of the universe then, and we still do. But Michigan had passed, it was a federal law, but Michigan had the Roth decision, which made the schools desegregate. Around that time also was Bradley v. Milligan, which made the schools, the Detroit Public Schools, offer vocational and technical education, which brings us to our 5 vote texts. There was Randolph, A. Philip Randolph. It was Go Lightly, named for Cornelius Go Lightly. Check out these names. Philip Randolph, Go Lightly, Edwin Crockett, Brighthawk, and one more. Come on. Okay, we'll come back. There were 5 vote texts. Now, that was because the skilled trades would not allow black and brown people into the apprenticeships. And there was a lawsuit filed, and it forced the Detroit Public Schools to offer vocational technical school under Bradley B. Milliken for 30 years. 30 years passed, the skilled trades remain segregated, and those schools are on the brink of closing. At the time that the desegregation order passed, bilingual education passed in Detroit, meaning that the Latino community had the right to learn Spanish in school. There was a right to have bilingual instruction in the Detroit public schools, and there was a lot of conflict between the black and the Latino communities. The conflict arose because the Latino community refused to be bused because we had just won the right to bilingual education. So if you move people out of their community, then they're not going to be able to get what they had long fought for. The black community fought having bilingual education because all the white people moved out and there wouldn't be anybody to bus. And they insisted that we had always considered ourselves white. We didn't always consider ourselves white, but we won the right to be white, the right to be white. In the Melendez case, when a Mexican family sued in order to be able to not have to go to the black district. They won that lawsuit, but they never confronted the segregation that they just got to go to the white schools, and that was the end of that. So there's a very important context in which that organizing was going on. There was a lot of conflict. It's not written about in any way that's coherent. I was there, I'm a witness. There were many other people who were witnesses, but the context of that organizing created a black-brown division that lasted to the present, and that we're still dealing with now. So I'll come back to that, but I want you to know that I'm laying the context for you.
Thank you.
Dennis Black again. Just to speak about the climate, my own limited experience dealing with organizing at Wayne State and surrounding the city of Detroit and even the state and the country, as I become more involved in this movement, there's a few disparities that I see that's happening here in the city. The first and foremost, and the largest, would be the intergenerational gap between the organizers and the people that find themselves in this particular type of work that's my age, and then the people who are ahead of maybe not so much as ahead of resources, but directors of nonprofits, people that's been in this movement for a really long time, and along with that, there's a bit of gatekeepers with that too.
Right.
And the biggest problem with that is of course youth inherit the revolution, and it seems as though from my own experience that a lot of organizations around the city, state, country wants to assimilate black youth narratives into their own narratives so that they can exploit black youth, so that they can exploit people that look like me and people that look like Shekinah in this form of work. And it's definitely one of the most frustrating things. It's the reason why I am as dogmatic as I am in the way that I come across to people, because if people think that they're going to assimilate me into their own egotistical, self-serving agenda, then you definitely have the wrong person. And this is something that's been going on for decades. This has been going on and on and on, and now it's our turn. And now there's this reference to the civil rights movement a whole lot more now. People call it the Black Lives Matter movement. I'll call it the Black Liberation movement. And this is not going to success will not happen unless there is a connection between the people that's been putting on, the people that's primarily been in the streets for the last 2 years, and then the people that have gotten us here, over the last 30 years.
That's right.
The shoulders that we stand on needs to now help us out and pass that baton of resources over. And that's definitely the climate that I personally see organizing on campus, organizing around the city, state, and around the country, that there's a massive lack there's a lack of relationship building that needs to be bridged.
Thank you.
I guess for me, I started doing in high school at Renaissance High School. It was around a particular issue that I was on the newspaper staff and they wanted covered because essentially somebody in ROTC had got kicked out of class, and she said it because she was gay. And so I wanted to organize around that. I felt like that was just ridiculous, and it was ridiculous. So we started to organize around it. That was my first experience doing any organizing. The climate back then was, George Bush was in office, so people were mad about his craziness. Kwame Kilpatrick was also in office, and that was a very interesting time. That was really one of the first times that I experienced feeling like white people felt a certain type of way about black people, by how they would talk about Kwame. And that kind of was a little bit of motivation for me going into college, knowing I wanted to be a full-time activist, or at least a very large portion of my life to be an activist. A lot of what Dennis is saying is very important. I'm in the AmeriCorps now, and I'm learning about what I've heard called as like the non-profit industrial complex. A lot of poverty's been going on. And that's, I would say that I'm really just waking up in terms of activism right now. So this is my context. I'm 24 years old, so I'm just starting to get a little bit of age and experience. But I'm very dissuaded with the way that the money is flowing in our city and really in our country. It's not flowing for our people, and that's something that I think is going to take a lot of self-determination in order to combat. And so that's really one of my favorite concepts, one of my favorite quotes from Dr. King is that, it's not the Emancipation Proclamation or the Civil Rights Act that's going to do anything free the Negro. It's he has a sign with the pen and ink of his own self-determination, his own Emancipation Proclamation. And so that's something that I take with me every day, and it's pretty much my answer.
I graduated from Cooley High School in 1967.
Yeah.
Kind of a big year. Cooley at the time was white majority. White flight was already being orchestrated by a variety of mechanisms, including blockbusting, which was moving toward the northwest side at the time. When I graduated, that summer, of course, was the rebellion, and I have a really vivid memory of, I feel like I was standing in the middle of Grand River looking toward downtown and seeing the smoke rising, and though it was being called a riot in the media, and that's certainly what I called it at the time, I instinctively understood that it was a rebellion. And I think for a variety of reasons there. I'll say my own calling as a pastor, my own vocation as an activist rooted in the city of Detroit passes through that moment and that really vivid image. I think I saw it differently, maybe than a lot of my peers on the Northwest side. For one thing, some years ago, I came across my high school term paper in the attic, and it was on civil disobedience. This is one of those papers where you learn to use note cards and the periodic index and all that. So I'd been reading the freedom struggle, and that was my high school term paper. The other thing that happened in 1966 was the Northern High School walkout, which was huge. I'm not saying I went, I was part of this. There were people in the room, and maybe still are, who were directly involved in that. But it touched me, and it changed the way that I saw what was happening in Detroit. I feel like it's one of the things that led to fed toward the Afrocentric curriculum that we were talking about earlier that the Detroit Public Schools eventually came to have. And in many ways that Victor was involved in many ways, sometimes actions don't have immediate consequences. There are consequences that play out over time. And I think that was in some ways such a very exciting period to be awakening politically and spiritually in. I'll say it just quickly, in the present moment of organizing, Detroit is the last major city in the country with a black majority.
That's right.
And they're working to change that. That's the moment that we're at. I guess I'd like to talk more about that as we go forward in this conversation with respect to youth and disruption. There's some disruptions that ought to be named and recalled.
I started organizing when I was 16 years old. I was a part of a program at the Michigan Roundtable that it was a youth internship, and I started to understand that the community that I was growing up in didn't necessarily want me to be there, or didn't necessarily have the capacity to understand or equip me for what I was about to do. That was around the time where I was understanding what Kwame was going through. I was understanding why Jordan Davis, why Trayvon Martin, why all of those individuals were being shot down. And that was particularly the time when Aiyana Jones was shot. A lot of times we forget about Aiyana Jones,
yes,
5-year-old girl who was shot by police. Not just shot, but like they came in and raided her house and shot her in the head while she was sleeping.
That's right.
There are young black children who are dying every day, and this is my reality. This is my fear. I grew up with a natural fear of the police, as we all did. And I don't know where I learned it from. That's just something that came about. When I was 14, I got an academic scholarship to a school in the suburbs called the Roper School. It was a school that was founded by Jews fleeing Nazi Europe. And so they founded the school to ensure that the Holocaust would never happen again. So I went to a school that was to ensure that we had mutual respect, interdependence, responsibility with freedom, all of these things that were founded by a Jewish family. But my senior year of high school, I founded the Black Student Union, and I almost didn't graduate. I have never in my life been so perplexed by a system that prepared me to revolt, but wasn't prepared for the revolt. So I knew in that moment that although we talk about all these things with liberals, white liberals, who think and they know what freedom is, who tell us, who give us these words and all of these things, and talk about the left and all of this, but when it comes to practice and reality and it happening, it never happens. There's always talk, there's always practice, but there's never the reality of it. And I would also say that when we're educating, I've learned, and I've been organizing for 5 years, that's it. I've learned that you do a disservice to young black people or young people in general when you do not include black women in your history. You do a disservice. Because that ultimately, to me, it wipes out black women. A lot of times when we talk about blackness and anti-blackness and violence and oppression and racism, we have this assumption that it doesn't happen to black women. We always say black men or we say black people. It happens to black women, and we need to start saying that. Like literally saying that, because people oftentimes do not believe that it's happening to us. And so that's why what's happening with Sandra Bland in Texas right now is so important. There have been countless who have been brutalized and killed by the police, and we don't even know their names. We don't take the time to protest and riot for them. The people who I've been organizing with, they're beginning to understand that, and I appreciate that so much. I would also say Jordan and Dennis are completely right about the nonprofit industrial complex. When you go to these organizations and they teach you all about this, they are afraid of the word black. They're afraid of the word liberation. They're afraid of red, black, and green. They are afraid of white supremacy. So I would say when you have young people in spaces, teach them not to be afraid to use those words, not to be afraid when other people tell them to use strategy, knowing when to use it and when to say it, but tell them not to be afraid and not to let anyone be afraid of you using it.
We got a fiery bunch up here. All right. I like that. So, while we dealt with the fight for vocational schools, how whites feel about blacks, the Northern High School walkout, the 67 rebellion, and the fears we had. How do you use your experience to accomplish the goals you set as organizers?
Something more or less guided principle that's at least guided me for the last 3 years. It's quite simple. It's piss poor preparation promotes piss poor performance.
All right.
So one, you got to prepare. You got to be diligent about preparation. So it's all in relation to what you're organizing around. So if it's police brutality, then there's more than a few things that you need to know before you organize around police brutality. What's the budget like for the city? What's the amount of crimes committed? What are the reports like for the officers in the city? How does that break down in the precinct? There's certain things that we ought to do as it relates to our experience and what we're organizing around to take history, to take our own experience, and then to take future readings and other knowledge that we might have gained in the past to inform or organize the methods of the future, and also always being open to growth.
Exactly. Very good. I like it.
Come on.
I said I wanted to come back to disruption, so I'm going to do that as an essential of organizing. And I'm thinking particularly of the Detroit water struggle. We are in a situation where a city on the Great Lakes with 20% of the world's fresh water flowing beside the city, a city that's been abandoned by the corporations, white flight, capital flight, job flight. They now want it back, and for good reason, because of where it sits. It's a black majority city, and there are maps, as you know. Detroit Future Cities is the main version of that, which names neighborhoods which are getting resources, neighborhoods which are having resources simply pulled out of them. Schools closed, churches pulled out. The churches are complicit in this abandonment of neighborhoods. Foreclosures, tax and mortgage foreclosures, and the water shutoffs are part of expelling people from those neighborhoods, which have futures not as neighborhoods, but as green space or water catchment areas. Neighborhoods where people are having their water shut off have a future underwater in marshes and what's blue space on the map. To lean into that assault, which is a real direct assault, does take disruption, does take direct action. And in addition to naming in the water struggle, it really is strong African-American women. Some of them have already been named: Marion Kramer and Maureen Taylor and Annette Cook-Seeley and Monica Lewis-Patrick and Deborah Taylor. Others in the room: Joanna, Lila. These are amazing folks. The first one that needs to be named, though, is Charity.
Charity, that's right.
Who resisted the shut-off street level.
Yes, she did.
And on behalf of her neighbors, and was taken to central detention. That was a huge risk that she was under. She had to be muscled out with a habeas corpus order because of the physical risk that she was under. And weeks later, she was struck down by a hit-and-run driver in New York, and subsequently died out from a coma. This is a woman who disrupted and thereby seeded the Detroit water struggle.
That's right.
She's the spirit and prime mover of that movement. I'm going to name some other disruptions. Young people disrupted City Council on the day that the Jones Day contract was approved by the City Council. Shut it down for 2.5 hours. Two of us, the Honorable Elena, Herrada, and I were the only ones of that group who were arrested that day. I guess I want to say I've been dragged out of the Detroit Water Board when they're voting on another contract for Homerick. I've been dragged out of federal bankruptcy court while Kevin Orr was testifying. The simple fact of breaking the decorum in those moments of what's actually illegal, unconstitutional, illegitimate, and everyone is acting like this is the way it works, totally untested in federal court, prevented by the bankruptcy from being tested. Those disruptions are crucial. A group of us, again, including folks in this room, have blocked the shut-off trucks. Some of us are awaiting a trial in 36th District Court yet to come. These things need to go, and I was so grateful for Tawana's description of the Cleveland intervention with the police. We're really talking about a youth movement. Black Lives Matter is a young people's movement that totally needs to be embraced. And I'll say one more thing about the Detroit water struggle. Last year we had a big split in the struggle. Not down the middle, but a big problematic issue on the side with resources and all kinds of energy diverted. And part of the opening for that split had to do with whether young people were really welcome at the table strategically and in terms of action planning. It made that gap made the movement in Detroit vulnerable to a huge dissipation that we didn't need to have faced. I'm going to shut up.
Because we're respectful of people's time, it is 1 minute to 9. We did say we were going to close out at 9. So I want to say thank the panel. We will be continuing this tomorrow with the banquet, as Baraka said earlier. Please come support, and we appreciate you. Good night.